going to finish out the book of Joshua for this quarter. I've really enjoyed studying this book and then also hearing the other three guys, Ross, Colton, and Chris, and their perspectives. It's been really fun for me and enlightening to hear the other guys' perspectives on the chapter. I was studying it along the way just so I could keep up with the context, and sometimes I would guess what they would say and sometimes I wouldn't. So it was really nice to all the different aspects that they covered. Also, I want to shout out for Chris. He's got some mad PowerPoint skills, so I'm very impressed. I don't even know how he did some of the stuff. I mean, I've been using PowerPoint for 20 years. Anyways. So let's combine, we'll review chapter 23, but at the same time, we're going to compare it with the upcoming chapter in 24. So we have a one-sided conversation in chapter 23. It's only 16 verses, and most of those verses is Joshua speaking. So we don't have any kind of response. We don't know how the Israelites took that speech. So here in chapter 24, we have 4 instances of a demand and a response. So now you have Joshua, God, and the Israelites interacting with each other. This book, the book of Joshua, is kind of like the movie The Return of the King and Lord of the Rings. It's, that movie's got like 7 different endings. And there's perfect spots for the movie to end, but it just never does. So that's like Joshua. So the chapters of 22, 23, and 24 all have perfect endings to a book, but then it just keeps adding on more so. So we have the farewell speech in chapter 23, and then we have a concluding chapter with a closing end at chapter 24. It's more than double the verses of chapter 23. In verse 2, as in verse 1 of the battling chapters there, we've got Israel, the elders, the heads, and the judges, and the officers all meeting together with Joshua. But in chapter 23, it seems like they're just meeting with Joshua. In chapter 24, they are presenting themselves before God. So I'm sure that had some kind of ceremony practice there of getting ready for that. We have the same elements. We have a history review, a challenge being made, and then promise or prophecy by God if they fail. You have, in both chapters, you have warnings to Israel. Chapter 23, best I can tell, it's in Shiloh, because that's where the tent of meeting is. But it also could be wherever Joshua ended up settling down. We do know that chapter 24 is in Shechem. Both have themes of apostasy. One is kind of a theme of don't mix with the other tribes. And chapter 24 is you guys are going to fail. You guys are very stubborn. Both have the same messages of don't mix with the cultures and religions around you. Joshua rambles for about 15 verses, but chapter 24 is a very well put together, balanced contract. So we're going to get into that. So we've come full circle back to Shechem. In Joshua 8, if we remember, at the end of that chapter, we're at Shechem. And he makes an altar, and that completes the full circle of Abram arriving in the land in chapter 12 of Genesis and building an altar. So Joshua builds this altar with all of Abram's descendants. And then Joshua 24, we have the fulfillment of the promise made there at Shechem to Abram. So a whole nother full circle. All right, so now we arrive at 24, and just as last week I had you watch for certain things, we're going to do the same thing tonight. So God will say 6 times, I gave. And then another 15 times he's going to have an I verb listed there. And then also 14 times we're going to see the word to serve. And this word, the root word for to serve, is this avad. And our purpose in life is to glorify God and to serve Him. And if you think about the word to serve, it's also to work. This is a huge theme throughout the whole entire Bible. So you have, in recent memory, they would have thought back to slavery, serving under Pharaoh. And now they're being asked to serve under God. And then they're also being warned not to serve these other gods that are all around you. And then also not to serve yourself. And I think that we can make that application today. Because all these things, if you pick Pharaoh or other gods or yourself, eventually you're going to arrive at some kind of slavery. Especially in our day, to slavery to sin. I think that's an application that we can take. You'll also notice in chapter 24 that no promise from God is being made except for the warnings. I mean, He's done with the current people in fulfilling the promises to them. And we do know that there's a few more promises out there yet to be fulfilled. For instance, way back in after the fall, the promise to crush the serpent's head, or to bless all the nations through Abram. Or there was a prophecy made through Jacob that a scepter was going to be given to the descendants of Jacob. So all these things have yet to be fulfilled, and none of these will happen in this generation. But this chapter is full of fulfilled promises made to the Israelites. So in the first section of chapter 24, verses 1 through 28, we have a very well put together, balanced flow to these verses. You have a historical section in verses 2 through 13, starting with thus says Yahweh, or thus says the Lord. This section contains the accomplishments of Yahweh through Joshua as a messenger, or as the messenger. Verse 14, we have the word atah, which means now or and now. It signals Joshua's challenge, a code of conduct, starting in verse 14, going through 24. And then you have a return to a narrative, as you had in verse 1, in verse 25 through 28, with a covenantal type ceremony. So you have a narrative, God's challenge is completed, Israel's challenge, and then moving forward, and then narrative again. So here in this chapter we have indicatives, which are signs, and that leads to imperatives, which are commands. We have a list of signs from verses 5 through 13, all made within living memory of a lot of those that are listening. And these are followed by God's commands and challenges in verses 14 through 24. So this is apparently a very common way of making contracts back in the day, both in the Bible as well as the surrounding Near Eastern communities, to recite the past before making a covenant. So if we can look at this Hittite treaty, you'll see some elements here that are very familiar. Obviously, you've got a prologue, which recounts the history. You've got stipulations. You have a public reading. Let's see, you've got witnesses. You have blessings and curses. So that's what happened back in chapter 8. And then sacrificial meal. So all these elements are very familiar to us if we've read through the Bible. All right, so let's start reading Joshua chapter 24. Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem and summoned the elders, the heads, the judges, and the officers of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. And Joshua said to all the people, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, long ago your fathers lived beyond the Euphrates, Terah, the father of Abraham and of Nahor, and they served other gods. Then I took from your father Abraham from beyond the Jordan and led them through all the land of Canaan, and made his offspring many. I gave him Isaac, and to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau, and I gave Esau the hill country of Seir to possess. But Jacob and his children went down to Egypt." All right, so we have in these 4 verses the mention of God's gift of offspring. And this is the first of 4 major gifts that we'll see in this chapter. Of course, every single time that God says, "I gave you this," or "I did this to you," is a gift of God. But we're going to go over the 4 major ones. Here, Joshua speaks for God. He says, "Thus says the Lord." So he's communicating what God would have him to do. And he's been doing this quite a bit in the book. It mentions that they served other gods. Abraham and Nahor, they took 2 different directions, right? Abraham decided to go follow God, and Nahor continued to worship his own idols. And we know that because Nahor's descendants, including Rachel, brought some of those other god idols with her, which then Jacob buried at the same exact site. We also have 3 "I gave" statements there, and then we have 3 other "I" verbs. So he took their father, led him, and made his offspring many. Then he gave him Isaac and Jacob, and then gave Esau land. All right. "And I sent Moses and Aaron, and I plagued Egypt with what I did in the midst of it. And afterward I brought you out. Then I brought your fathers out of Egypt, and you came to the sea. And the Egyptians pursued your fathers with chariots and horsemen to the Red Sea. And when they cried to the Lord, he put darkness between you and the Egyptians, and made the sea come upon them and cover them. And your eyes saw what I did in Egypt, and you lived in the wilderness a long time." All right, so in these 3 verses we have the second gift from God to Israel, the gift of him rescuing Israel out of the land of Egypt in verse 6. And then did you notice at the end of verse 5, you had the pronoun change. All of a sudden, the history includes the people who are listening, right? So before, he couldn't use the pronoun "you" because they were not alive back when Abraham was. Then we also have an "I" verb statement. So we got several "I" verb statements there. All right, so let's move on to verse 8. "Then I brought you to the land of the Amorites, who lived on the other side of the Jordan. They fought with you, and I gave them into your hand. And you took possession of their land, and I destroyed them before you. Then Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab, arose and fought against Israel. And he sent and invited Balaam, the son of Beor, to curse you. But I would not listen to Balaam. Indeed, he blessed you, so I delivered you out of his hand." So again, we've got the third gift, which is the gift of Transjordan for the eastern tribes. And then we also have one "I gave" statement up there from God, as well as 4 other "I" verb statements. Like I said, this is God's story. The Bible is God's story of what he did for his people and for mankind. One of the keys to being obedient is gratefulness. Israel should be grateful for what God did for them. As we'll see in a little bit, they definitely didn't earn it. Verse 11. "And you went over the Jordan and came to Jericho, and the leaders of Jericho fought against you, and all the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And I gave them into your hand, and I sent the hornet before you, which drove them out before you. the 2 kings of the Amorites. It was not by your sword or by your bow. I gave you a land on which you had not labored, and cities that you had not built, and you dwell in them. You eat the fruit of vineyards and olive orchards that you did not plant. So we got the 4th gift here. That's a little off there, but we have the gift of Canaan. In verse 12, you'll notice the hornet. The hornet was a term used many times to describe an army. But here it seems that God sent a plague. In the book of Joshua, we actually see a few plagues, don't we? We've covered a lot of those. They remind us of some of the ones in Egypt, like the hail or the prolonged light, which would be the inverse of the darkness day. And now we have the hornet, which is reminiscent of all the insect plagues of Egypt. So this whole section is telling the Israelites, I gave you big gifts that you did not earn. We had an I sent statement and 2 I gave statements made by God. Also, we have, hopefully these are all lined up. Yep, nope, I got 1. 1 made it. So we've got 4 not statements, emphasizing that they didn't earn all these things given to them in the land of Canaan. So now we have the second sequence in the next 11 verses. And we have the famous saying by Joshua made, choose for yourself, for me and my house we will serve the Lord. So this section contains 7 commands and 5 demand statements by Joshua and 4 responses by the people of Israel. All right, verse 14. Now therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if it is evil in your sight, or in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Okay, so here's the first command in these 2 verses. We have 7 serve words, which, remember, that was the root word of that is avad. So here's an opportunity for Israel to respond, to show obedience and integrity and faithfulness, just as God has been faithful to them. Also, just as Jacob did with his wives' gods, Joshua now tells the people to put away the gods from beyond the river and from Egypt. Then we have back up in verse 14, we've got the and now, or now therefore in some versions. Joshua seems to stop speaking for God as a direct messenger, and then now he's speaking as the Israelite leader. Here in this first command is 5 commands. So we have fear the Lord, serve him in sincerity, serve him in faithfulness, put away those gods, and then choose this day who you will serve. The Israelites are clearly impacted by Joshua's statement, we will serve the Lord as we are today, because they repeat this phrase, the same phrase, 3 times in the preceding verses. Verse 16, then the people answered, far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods, for it is the Lord our God who brought us and our fathers up from the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, and who did those great signs in our sight, and preserved us in all the way that we went, and among all the peoples through whom we passed. And the Lord drove out before us all the peoples, the Amorites who lived in the land. Therefore, we also will serve the Lord, for he is our God. So here we have the Israelites copying the contract structure from God. So we have history stated, and then followed by a contract statement. And then they say, we will also serve the Lord, which is repeating Joshua's statement. So in these 3 verses, we have their first response. And it's interesting that they use far be it from us, which was also used in chapter 22, verse 29. It was the same response that the tribes of Reuben and Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh used in defense after they were accused of rebelling against God. He said, far be it from us that we would do these kind of things. Verse 19, but Joshua said to the people, you are not able to serve the Lord, for he is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your transgressions or your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, then he will turn and do you harm and consume you after having done you good. And the people said to Joshua, no, but we will serve the Lord. So this response from Joshua is kind of shocking. It's coming from the mediator. He's the middleman between God and Israel. So usually the mediator doesn't weigh in a contract, but he is here. In verse 19, we see Joshua reminding the people that God is holy. And holy means like you don't mess with, stay back, don't touch, because you are not worthy to even approach God. In these verses, we have a second set of demand, second set of demand statement and response. Their response is the second repeat of Joshua's "We will serve the Lord." And if we remember from what we learned in chapter 23, this word transgression, it's a reversal of the word crossing. And we've crossed quite a bit in the book of Joshua. We crossed over the Jordan, and we crossed into the land. There's I think there was 53 times the word crossing is used. So this is a reversal of that crossing. Joshua remembers what was said way back in Deuteronomy chapter 31. He was with Moses during this. If you go back up a couple verses in verse 14, you'll see he's there in the tent of meeting, Joshua. And so the Lord told Moses that the people will rise in horror after the foreign gods and forsake my covenant. Sorry, that's a little off. All right, verse 22. Then Joshua said to the people, you are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen the Lord to serve. And they said, we are witnesses. He said, then put away the foreign gods that are among you and incline your heart to the Lord, the God of Israel. And the people said to Joshua, the Lord our God we will serve, and his voice we will obey. All right, so we have this word witness. It's just like the witness used in Exodus 24:7 or at Mount Sinai. And every other time they've built an altar or a stone of remembrance. There's an aspect of witnessing. I mean, this is not all done in a cave, right? Moses didn't come down, or Joshua didn't come down and say, this is all what happened. No, they saw every single thing that happened. They went through the land, they crossed the Jordan, they saw the plagues. They were witnesses, and they even admitted so in the previous verses. So this is the third set of demand response statements. And we have a sixth and seventh command here set by Joshua to put away gods and incline your heart to the Lord. All right, so then we have the final response from Israel that we will serve the Lord, another repeat of what Joshua had said. So now in this next section, starting in verse 25, we will see the ratification of the covenant. So Joshua made a covenant with the people that day and put in place statutes and rules for them at Shechem. And Joshua wrote these words in the book of the law of God. And he took a large stone and set it up there under the terebinth that was by the sanctuary of the Lord. And Joshua said to all the people, behold, this stone shall be a witness against us, for it has heard all the words of the Lord that he spoke to us. Therefore it shall be a witness against you, lest you deal falsely with your God. So Joshua sent the people away, every man to his inheritance. All right, so here Joshua has the final word. There's no response after this. His fifth demand statement. So this hyperlinks back to, again, to Jacob burying his wife's foreign gods, but at this terebinth tree. So here we have something godly instead of the sinful idols, something offered to them. That's a lot better. Now this word terebinth is sometimes translated oak in your Bible. Joshua recorded these things, what just happened in the book of the law of God under the oak near the holy place of the Lord. So here's some hyperlinks to oaks and terebinth trees. So the first one is the oak of Moreh at Shechem. Abram arrived here from Haran and then built the altar to God. Next we have an oak at Shechem. Jacob buries his wife's foreign gods. And then here in chapter 24, we have Joshua back taking a large stone and putting it by the oak at Shechem. So I did some research, and apparently some species of oak trees can live up to 1,000 years. Terebinth trees, some species can live up to 500 years. So either way, this time frame is within 500 years of Abram arriving in the area. So it is totally possible that this is the same tree that's just been waiting here for ages and ages for Jacob to come back with Abram's descendants. All right. So here are all the memorials set up in the Old Testament up to this time in the mount. I mean, they were leaving these things in quite a bit of spots. But first we got Jacob's stone at Bethel. We've got Jacob sets up a pillar near Gilead as a witness between him and Laban. Then in Joshua chapter 4, we've got 2 sets of 12 stones, one set by the 12 men and one by Joshua. We've got Joshua 7, the heap of stones marking Achan in the valley of Achor, and that means the valley of trouble. Joshua writes on the stone on the Mount of Ebal, the law of the Lord. And then Joshua 22, we've got the eastern tribes build an altar to the Lord. And then Jacob sets this pillar up as well. I was supposed to be clicking while I was reading those. So they're kind of scattered there, but they're all supposed to be reminders, which is really good to put in the land, right? They're supposed to be able to remind those and have their kids come up and go, what's this mean? And then they're supposed to be able to explain it to them. So starting in verse 29, we have in this bottom section a narrative to finish things out. All right, so after these things, Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old. And they buried him in his own inheritance at Timnath-Serah, which is in the hill country of Ephraim, north of the mountain of Gash. Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua and had known all the work that the Lord did for Israel. As for the bones of Joseph, which the people of Israel brought up from Egypt, they buried them at Shechem in the piece of land that Jacob bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of money. It became an inheritance of the descendants of Joseph. And Eleazar, the son of Aaron, died, and they buried him at Gibeah, the town of Phinehas, his son, which had been given him in the hill country of Ephraim. So here in these last verses, we have short reports of 2 deaths and 3 burials. Again, that's a little off. Also in verse 31, we learn Joshua was both wrong and right. He said that they wouldn't serve God, but they did, but as long as the elders who had known all the work the Lord did for Israel still were alive. They were living memorials. It seems like when living memorials are around, that everybody does better. And that's exactly an application for us today, that we are also supposed to be living memorials to those around us, memorials of Christ. In verse 29 starts a section of Joshua's death and burial. So it mentions that Joseph was 110 years old. Now, if we look back to Genesis chapter 50, And there's another guy that lived to 110, and that was Joseph. Now, this 110 is actually significant in the Egyptian world. That number meant that you had been blessed by a god. So it's very interesting that God chose to end Joseph's life. It's about right there. Now, do we remember which tribe Joshua is from? Well, that would be the tribe of Ephraim, who was one of Joseph's sons. So it's very fitting that both Joshua and Joseph, his ancestor, were both buried here at the end of chapter 24. Joshua is the 11th generation from Joseph. You can find this in Chronicles, by the way. I was trying to find it the other day. I was like, where is it? So it's fitting that at the end of Joshua, both him and his ancestor Joseph is buried. So in verse 30, it mentions they buried Joshua not far from Shechem or Shiloh at Timnath-Seah in the hill country of Ephraim, about right there. So Joshua from the tribe of Ephraim, it would make sense that he was buried in Ephraim. Since Joshua was from the tribe, I just said that. In verse 32, it says that Joseph was buried in Shechem. So we got Timnath-Serah, where Joseph was buried, or Joshua. There's too many J names. So Shechem is where Joseph was buried, up there, and then Shiloh is where the tent of meeting is. So this is kind of a little sweet spot here in the land. It's also, let's see. I meant to say that Joseph was buried smack dab in the middle of Ephraim and Manasseh, which was his two sons. So Shechem, if I can go back, we know that Shechem is just north of there, so it's just north of, right around where Ephraim and Manasseh meet, right on the border. In verse 33, we have the burial of Eleazar, Aaron's son, at Gibeah. The transition in this chapter from Shechem to Gibeah is significant. Shechem will continue to mean a lot to Israel, but it's already kind of had a story arc. Well, Gibeah, the one in red, that one is kind of starting a story arc. So Gibeah is where the rated R stuff in Judges happen, from chapters 19 through 21. And then Saul later goes to that area and is filled with the Spirit and starts prophesying. And then later Saul uses that as a military post. So it kind of has its own little story arc through the Bible. All right, so final thoughts. So in chapters 1 through 5, we've got Joshua is the new Moses. Joshua leads Israel. Then we had the spies and Rahab crossing of the Jordan. Chapters 6 through 12, we've got the battles. So we've got Jericho and Ai. We've got the failures with Achan and the Gibeonites. In chapters 13 through 22, we've got Joshua dividing the land. And Joshua 23, 24, we've got Joshua's final words. So the author of Joshua leads you to think, well, what are they going to do? And so, I don't know if you can see that guy, but I don't think it was intentional, but the last class was Judges, which seems like we're going backwards. But if you go back and listen to his class, he can tell you all about what happens. All right, so now in the timeline of great leaders, after Joseph, we've got Moses and then Joshua. And then I'm not sure if there's really a great leader in Judges, but eventually we get to Samuel. So we've got these four leaders of Israel, these kind of four pillars. So we're going to compare Moses to Joshua because the book of Joshua is filled with mentions of Moses. In fact, it's 58 times Moses is referred to. So Moses was a friend to God, spiritually superior to Joshua, I think, both scolded by God, but Joshua acted more like the people we saw in we saw in Joshua 7. So he made this statement to God after the people died at the Battle of Ai. Why did you ever bring this people across the Jordan to deliver us into the hand of the Amorites to be destroyed? Which Moses never made that statement, but Israel definitely did. So Joshua here is kind of speaking more like the people. So both at times forgot to consult God, and it turned out very poorly. Neither were able to atone for the sins of others like Christ, both saviors of Israel, but not from sin. Both saved Israel from sinning multiple times. Joshua was able to enter the promised land, and Moses was not. He also gave a good report in the land, Joshua did, and he had zeal enough to know that with God, they could go and take the land. I think Joshua had more zeal, at least from the get-go, because Moses told God that he made the excuse that he was not a very good speaker back at the burning bush. So only Joshua was given an honorable death and burial, and Moses was eventually able to enter the promised land. But when do you think that was? When Moses entered the promised land? That would be the Mount of Transfiguration. The application I think we can take from here is that both these guys pale in comparison to Jesus. And both had their better values compared to one another, but Jesus is better than both. Like Moses, Jesus, the Son of God, not just a friend, he leads us through our lives. And like Joshua, Jesus is for all the people, not just the Israelites. And he leads us into our promised land and out of the water into salvation. Jesus is even baptized in the Jordan like Joshua, figuratively. Now, Joshua has a huge story arc. You think of all the things that he saw. You got Exodus, the plagues. He went to spy. He saw Mount Sinai, writing the law. He saw quite a bit. And then we've got him as being a leader in the book of Joshua. And I think it's amazing. Sorry, that's all kind of scrambled. I should have gone through that back there. But it's amazing how, even though Joshua's life is so wondrous, how constant God is. He's the same God back in the garden as he is today, as he was in this account of Joshua. One of the applications I think we can make out of this is that God is really invested in our salvation. Look at all that he did just in this book alone. And we can have assurance of our salvation, that God has provided us a way, just like he provided a way for the Israelites and Joshua. So some things to point out. Let's see. Joshua ended up being a great leader, but in the big picture, he was not the savior of the people to help resolve the separation of man from God. He was just a mediator, right? He couldn't do any better than that. He was not a king or a high priest, and he would not bless all of mankind, but he did bless the Israelites. He was faithful to give a good report, like we've already said, and he was rewarded with going into the promised land and rewarded with land himself. The people of Israel also failed and will continue to, through Judges and all the way till Babylonian captivity, with more dire consequences. And we already see a pattern of obedience and disobedience in Joshua. We see little cracks in their armor. So we see that Joshua does all these things without consulting God. He sends the spies and makes a covenant with Rahab. At some point, they began to rush across the Jordan for no apparent reason. The men at Ai died. They didn't consult God before they attacked Ai. Other things include the Gibeonite deception. Joshua starts questioning them or mentioning that they did not drive out the nations before them. The territory for the people of Dan was lost. And then at the end, Joshua's like, you're not going to be able to serve the Lord. All right, so we got some hyperlinks back to the book of Joshua. One I want to talk about more so than others real quick is Hebrews 4:8. So the Hebrew writer in 4:8 mentions this Joshua rest. But this rest is not the kind of rest that he actually did give Israelites. So the rest that he gave Israelites is the word nuach, which is like a settling down, like the ark settled on Mount Ararat. And then you have a different kind of rest called the Shabbat, which is also the Sabbath, which is a whole different kind of rest. It just means to cease from labor. And so the Hebrew writer here uses the latter Greek form to cease from labor. So Joshua was not able to give them a spiritual rest or a rest from labor, but he was able to help them settle down. So that's one of these points that the Hebrew writer is making here. So this points to how Joshua was unable to be the spiritual leader the Israelites and mankind needed, but his namesake later, Jesus, would have to be the spiritual leader where Yahweh would bring salvation to all people. Jesus is our Joshua today, leading us spiritually in our lives. So that concludes my lesson, and we'll close out with a prayer real quick.